One of the problems with modern society and with American society is there's so many ways to fill your life with comfort and with distractions that even if you have some level of desperation, you can always fill it with other things. This book is for that person who is done filling up their writing time with other things.
This is Hacking It with Dan Allen and Robert Cavalier.
Hey, Robert, this is Hacking It with Dan and Robert, and we've been away for a little bit, finishing up our project that started this podcast, that kind of inspired this podcast. So let's talk a little bit about what made us interested in writing a book about writing, because you and I, we've written for years, decades now, and we're seasoned writers, but the thing that's kind of eluded us all this time is making that step to publishing. And for me, it always had to do with confidence, and that confidence affected my ability to even finish a book. And so for me, this book is kind of geared towards that audience of writers that struggle with completing the task because of whether it's a confidence issue, whether it's life getting in the way, and life is really complicated. And if there's no time to write, what do? Do you just give up your dream?
The book is called Manifest Your Story in 21 Days. So it really kind of encapsulates what brought us together in terms of figuring out what could be attractive to someone who is maybe at a starting phase of their writing path. And even someone who might be more seasoned could actually just pick up the pieces. Maybe they've failed at a project or abandoned a project before, a story, a novel, whatever it was, and didn't know how to restart, didn't know how it failed for them. And I think this book really does it. I've been very impressed because you've done a lot of the heavy lifting lately. I started out with a lot of ideas about the book being a source of a way of building motivation, but also honing in on the necessary fundamental skills that you need to write, as well as ultimately becoming more independent. And by independent, I mean you've got enough autonomy because you've got enough miles behind you that you know what is working and what isn't working. Now, that's a very difficult skill to develop in any kind of art, because everybody has a blind spot, especially people starting out or people who are frustrated. It's just a different way of looking at yourself. And I think this book can be a lens for that, as well as a launching point for getting into a practice that becomes habitual.
Yeah, and that's what I liked about your take on the book the whole time has been, let's talk about dividing up writing a story or getting a book started in the 3 weeks, step by step, day by day, and bring up the relevant topics. But really what we're doing, that you've said all along, is almost tricking the writer into becoming a writer. It really doesn't matter ultimately if you followed the book religiously, step by step, and you did every exercise. The point is developing that habit and that routine of becoming a writer, and at which point you can write anything you want. But that doesn't happen overnight. Becoming a habitual writer does not happen overnight, and it takes, the research says it takes about 21 days to develop any new habit. Is you can't shortcut that. So ironically, it's kind of a hack to use 21 days to develop a habit, because then that habit, as long as you still give it time and commitments, is going to become part of your life. It's going to become part of who you are. But there is no hack to develop a habit by being inconsistent. There's no hack around that. You have to be consistent. And so that's what this book really is about, I think.
I agree with that. And how do we feel about the process that took us through some of the different ideas about this book? I mean, how did we develop and start looking at how we write and what we think about writing? I mean, I'll say that for me, it's not the most comfortable subject, even though we're excited about the book, just because it's a very complex arena to get into. It's just a lot of things to put together. But I think that we made that a more streamlined process and a more streamlined and more polished presentation so that it's more accessible. How did we get there?
Well, for me, it required that I followed the creed that the book states, which is you must be devoted to your craft. But it did require me, in order to be able to write a book about writing, to be as devoted, as committed, as consistent as possible, more consistent than I'd ever been. And really, it wasn't even the consistency. I think it goes back to having that killer instinct.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to follow it. I couldn't fake it.
No, that's a great takeaway. I feel that throughout the time that we started this, we swapped motivational plateaus a bit, because I was in a different place, and now, just like anyone facing different challenges, realizing within myself, and even though it may have been pretty obvious, that the things that we face at hand, the real life, if you want to call it, which I don't like to call anything outside of writing the real life, because writing is the real life. It's all, for me at least, all intertwined. But one set of circumstances does have an effect on who you are and how you're regulating your emotions, how you're able to even undertake a project, even as small or as big as this writing project. So I think that we did swap. You picked up where I had left off in some way, in a lot of ways. And even just to get the lift off many months ago, last year, was something that we hadn't even really done. We knew we wanted to have this concept, but we didn't really know what title or what approach or who the target audience would be. And it became a process of working at it until we could hone in. I think the book itself is a kind of a testimony to, if you work on something, even in front of, or even if you're facing difficult circumstances, as I have, I'll just be open about that. Just don't want to make it some kind of a thing that were unsurmountable, but many different challenges. You will have those challenges. So writing is not an escape. It's not an escape, because you can't just do it when you're feeling good. You could do that, but then think about how far you would actually get. We were talking about teams that are doing well and bad in the NFL. And if any of those teams just decided, well, we're not going to go to practice anymore because we're not really going to make it anyway. We're not going to get we're not even going to make the playoffs probably, because we've lost 6 games in a row. They usually don't have that attitude. First of all, they get paid a tremendous amount of money to not have that attitude. Getting into that mode of thinking, it really starts to define you more as a professional person, and a person who's developing their artistry, and for whom, like you've done, that is a central part of their life, and not an ancillary part of their life, not somewhere they go and retreat to, which again you can do. And we're not only speaking to people who are having an aspiration of writing the very best that they can, but also to those who might be coming to this as a way of exploration. Maybe this is a hobby for them, which is, I think, totally commendable. Maybe this is something that they're just working to build on a memoir of their grandfather or something like that. But what tools can they use to make that happen? And what habits that they hadn't realized were there needed changing? I think the book does a great job at not only putting you in the driver's seat in terms of let's go right, but also to look at yourself and how you're shaping yourself. Yes, at the beginning you're not going to know that, but you should at the end know that something has changed. I'm all of a sudden a little bit different. I've got enough miles behind me that I'm different now. I've got the ability to finish a story. I love the way, one of the things I want you to speak about is this way that you and I, but more, I think you, wove in a central story that you constructed for the purposes of the book, and in a way to weave in. Tell me about how we wove in those very difficult and sometimes intimidating literary concepts in writing into this daily practice.
whether you are taking on a novel or a short story doesn't really matter, as we talked about, because once you develop those habits, you can write whatever you want. And what has been remarkable to me is that but before I answer your question directly, is that even having a little bit of time every day that you are consistently writing and produce so much. It just has blown me away. I've done more in the last, I would say, since August. I mean, it probably goes back a little bit farther than that, but between August and January, I've done more completed writing, more polished writing than I have my entire life, by just being consistent with a little bit of time. That's the power of developing the right habits. And so for the sake of the book, we wanted to allow somebody to manifest an actual completed story if they wanted to. And so we use an example original story called Regret. It has a simple conceit of a character, in a life or death situation. And it's really a story about his internal struggle between selfishness and living a life of regrets, and trying to rectify the wrongs in his life. And so it takes you week by week, it gives you illustrations of what each step could look like. Now, it's not meant to be necessarily the blueprints for your story, what your outline, what your brainstorming, what your rough draft is going to look like, but it gives you an actual example of what it could look like. Because for me, sometimes, one of the most important things that you've taught me over the years, which is why this is such a good collaborative effort, is that you've taught me the importance of outlining. Like, I've always been big into brainstorming. I love to sit down and just explore an idea and write for pages, and then it's all messy, and I come up with some good ideas. But then what do you do with that?
Yeah.
So the first week talks about the brainstorming process, which I think is super important, because the way that the mind works, the way that the creative mind works, is that you don't even really know what you're capable of until you actually start writing. But then outlining, you said, is so important. And that's what week 2 really focuses on.
You filter in a lot of those great ideas. I like one of the parts that I read, that I think was one of the spots in which you wrote, in which, and you talk about, well, you can sometimes get into so much of the brainstorming when you're writing excitedly that you can come up with something that isn't really a story, but just a kind of a disorganized, I don't know how you put it, but a disorganized, maybe chaos or a mass of ideas that really isn't a rough draft, but you think that it's a rough draft. It's not. It's really just a bunch of things playing against each other. I like that you pointed it out, because I think that's a point where someone can become frustrated if they finish and they think, well, this is something, right? And hey, could you read this? I mean, do I have something? They don't know. But if they think about it a little bit more, if they have so many doubts about whether this is a worthy story or not, it's probably because something is missing. Some things are missing, and either you created what you're doing there. Anybody, any writer of anything, songs or books or whatever, is a process. So whether you think that you're not doing the process or not, you really are. It's just that we want to bring you to a point where you're more self-aware, and, to use this overused word now, intentional. I like to say deliberate. To be very deliberate about what you're doing. Doesn't mean you start slow or cautious or scared. It means if you've ever ridden a horse or something, it doesn't mean you just, it means you're controlling this beast, because creativity is like that. It's just a beast. It will come at you and has enormous power. But then you have to decide what are the paths you're going to take that picture your road, the picture that really pave the road that you're going to go through. And so becoming kind of an architect, but not sacrificing those instincts that you might have, and that beauty that brought you to the book and to the ideas. Absolutely. Outline can be a very boring subject. I'll admit, I don't like to really share a lot about what I do. But without it, and with the process that I built for myself, which is not in the book, and it doesn't need to be, it has it was one of those things that really took me to a different level of where I'm looking at the work as though it were someone else's work, detaching but still connected. I don't have very much of an. I'm an editor of myself. I'm a critic of myself in what I'm doing, and of course, I'm gonna miss some things, some big things, um, but that's the way you can make progress, by making these sort of leaps and bounds of small realizations that lead to an epiphany that can lead to a breakthrough for you as someone that's creating something new. I like to, in the brainstorming part of it all, I like to not have someone just think that dedicating every day for writing has to be the absolute end all be all of everything. You could have had a very creative session with yourself just on a long walk, thinking about things, letting things process. That's writing. It may not be on the page yet, but it's writing. You're in the process. You're living with, as I used to say, living with the manuscript. That consistency of always being in communion with what you're doing is going to have, it's going to become like an avalanche. You're going to not even know how much is going to be coming at you because you've been thinking and thinking and thinking about it. So you don't have to write every day, but you at least have to think about something. Like you could think like, man, what about that? I wonder why I named that character this. What does that mean? Or it could be whatever. It could be anything. I wonder if I'm doing this. Oh, I really like this. Oh, and then all of a sudden on a walk or something, get out there, do something. Don't just be sitting and locked in into this place of stress and pressure and frustration. You don't have to live like that. Creativity is not about that. It's about freedom. So free, be kind to yourself. Don't take yourself on. Don't take yourself as you're doing your regular job where you are expected to be chained in. No, walk around, move around, talk to yourself, talk to your dog. Go, and then when you've done finish writing, try to think of read and reread and try to come back, and it'll just pop into your mind. It's like one of the things that's in the book that I really love, and it's for you to make up your own process. And if you want to use this as a template way to launch that, great. If you oppose everything that is said in the book, that's great too. I've always said it, because now you've defined your view, your aesthetic, your knowledge, and that's what we want. And coming back to what we want to hear, or we want to convey to you, to y'all, is that first, start writing, and second, write better, and third, everything else will fall into place. I think that's pretty much says it all.
Yeah. And I think one of the things about this book, as far as a target audience, is those people who are desperate to get something done, to begin the process. Because this book does not, just to be very clear, does not tell you how to become a published writer, because you can't even talk about becoming published until you become a writer in the first place. And if you never get to that point of desperation, I don't think this book is going to be that meaningful. I think you have to, and I think one of the problems with modern society and with American society is there's so many ways to fill your life with comfort and with distractions that even if you have some level of desperation, you can always fill it with other things. This book is for that person who is done filling up their writing time with other things, with other distractions, with other comforts.
That feeling of desperation can also be looked at as aspiration or a hunger to have something that's produced. And I think that you can speak to that because you hadn't finished a project that you felt good about for a long time. So you can really speak to that, and to just, I know that there are many people out there that are telling themselves, man, I want to write that book. I don't know how I can or ever will. I want to write that story, but I don't know, because it's in them. They have a voice. They have something that they'd like to see dramatized, that they'd like to see played out in a narrative, and they're just not there because the launching point doesn't exist for them yet. And this is a way to, as you said, just really jumpstart into action.
Yeah, and it doesn't really matter what profession you are, what your day job is, what your other hobbies are. It doesn't mean anything unless you pick up your pen and start writing and are deliberate about it. So this book, again, gives you the bare bones of what it takes to start that or restart that journey.
There are a lot of books about writing and how to write it, which are probably much better, and I'm sure. But there are also a lot of them that are wanting. I think ours may be more unique in the sense that it's accessible and it's not going to overwhelm you with a lot of heady things. Yes, those concepts are very important to know, but we also want you to be in the driver's seat, to be typing, to be engaged, and to identify the things that hijack that process. Like I said before, it's not an escape, although it can feel so amazing. The highs of creating something are so rewarding. Which is why people like to do creative projects, whatever it is, especially in writing, because you hit something that it feels like dancing with the gods. But don't rely just on that emotion, because there are going to be a lot of lows, and there are going to be a lot of the whole spectrum of emotions will be there, and it's up to you to rein it in. And how you develop that and how you cope with those challenges is what's going to make a difference. Dan and I, we've been running for a long time, but we want to get to the next level. And the next level for us, we've identified in a different couple of ways. One of them is obviously to get out there. It took a lot for us to even come together, and even though we know each other for a long time, to even be speaking like this and to be doing these kinds of things. This just didn't come out of thin air. It took commitment and motivation. We've got a bunch of stuff to do that we could be doing, but we want to dedicate this time because it's a labor of passion in a lot of ways. But we also want to see the rewards of reaching out to a bigger audience. We want to be published in the biggest venues that we can, and we're sharing with you the process that we're going and what we're learning. And many of the things I told Dan over the summer and now is that I was locked in, and I've been locked in. It's more my personality to be a bit more pessimistic and more negative. It's just part of who I am. And I think there's a lot of people like that. I think Dan is more optimistic, more positive. And I see so many ways that helps him progress, that helps you progress and accomplish your goals, that you're goal-oriented. I am also goal-oriented, but I've had so many setbacks that I didn't want writing and publishing to become a goal that I could, be hurt. But I was probably thinking out of fear, and I'm still negotiating those emotions. I still don't know what that's going to look like, but because of your encouragement and because of our coming together in these projects, I know that I'm going to have to face that ultimate challenge and get the grunt work that it requires, which is whether it's self-publishing and making sure your platforms are correct, or whether it's through traditional publishing where you're queuing, whether you're sending queries out, whether you're communicating professionally, whatever it is, that is something that we're going to be working on this very year.
So this is our test drive of the self-publishing process, and we're going to share everything that we learn from it, because it is an exciting time, as well as a kind of intimidating time where you don't want to become just another piece of the slush pile of writing that's out there. But that's at the same time, it allows you to not depend upon the huge, massive publishing industry that can bog writers down. So we're going to share what that path looks like with this book, and we are excited for everybody who wants to get their hands on it. And again, that's going to be coming out on March 1st. And there's going to be details and links in the description of this video so that you can go ahead and save some money and pre-buy it. All right, until next time. We'll see you, Robert.
Okay, bye.